Shortly after dropping off Ronnie Ann at her house, Lincoln made his way towards his own home, still hung on the optimism over their little chat. His smile hadn't faltered since. Whatever I like it or not, my sisters were right about Ronnie Ann does like me. His smile dropped a little, even though I didn't get the best advice. The corners of his mouth swung upwards again. At least I know she wasn't weirded out by it. Heck, he might as well forgive his friends for being so secretive around him. Being in the state where trust was quite low, they didn't want to end up like the avoid all contact for as long as possible list as well. Of course he already knew about that, but affirmation from Ronnie Ann helped this cement through that. He might even have thanked his sisters later in their part of the mess. If he ever gets comfortable with being with them, that is. Turning onto the street, Lincoln could already see his house was on the other end of the row. As distance between himself and his home drew narrower, he couldn't see the familiar shape of God knows how old the family van in the driveway was. I didn't get home that early, did I? Coasting along, he made upright to the concrete path. The loud didn't hear telltale sounds of human movement in the walls. Lincoln pushed his lips through, directing to his attention to the garage. Upon stopping, he knelt down and pulled out the handle near the ground. The small building vibrated as the heavy door moved along its track. It went without saying that the inside of the garage would have made you think that stepping into a hoarder's home. Boxes of haphazardly stacked in various spots, filled with holiday decorations or home junk that couldn't fit in the attic. And there was one hiding spot along where the kids kept their own mods of unmotorized transportation. However, this like in the morning, Lincoln couldn't help but notice that it felt more spacious than usual. Didn't Luna kept like 20 speakers in here? I mean, this was the only place she could put them in, right? Deciding to leave those thoughts alone, Lincoln parked his bike next to Lynn's and left his helmet on the handlebars. He made sure to lower the door completely behind him, as it had a tendency to get stuck and spring back up without warning. Going back around to the front of the house, the lad was a little surprised to find the front door unlocked. "Hello?" he called out as he walked in. Nothing but silence greeted him. "Is anybody here?" Lincoln called out again. A metallic ringing accompanied by rapid small footsteps coming from the kitchen to the dining room. Looking towards the source, Lincoln looked down to see Charles and smiled as he barked happily while the little terrier ran to him. He started to chuckle as the pup clawed on his pant legs, hopping on the spot. Kneeling down, "Don't worry, boy. I'm not going anywhere." Lincoln petted Charles, seemingly calming the pup for a moment. "Have you seen anyone else?" Charles shook his head before scratching an itch behind his ear with his hind leg. "Guess no one made it yet. Looking back at the front door, though it doesn't explain why it wasn't locked." Lincoln stood up straight as he shut the door, making sure to turn on the little tumbler knob. One of these days, Mom and Dad or Dad are going to have a fit about this. Leaving bad habit doors aside, Lincoln took a moment to relish the rare silence of the house. It reminded him of Clyde's place, like any other day. The only time on 1216 Franklin Avenue wasn't living up to its namesake, that was no one was home. But even so, Lincoln couldn't enjoy the silence the way he would have liked, and he knew it was only a matter of time before one of his siblings arrived. And more importantly, he had to figure out a way he could speak with Lenny in solitude. Given her personality, there was a strong possibility that she'd come for him, but she also may not want to avoid risking invading his privacy. Ugh! Lincoln sighed, dragging his feet as he walked to the kitchen. "This is why I told Lynn I don't like to have planned to be around them all the time. It's just so tiring." He felt his temple throb a little as he spoke. Charles made curious yips as he followed his owner, only to be shooed away by a hand wave. Opening up the fridge, Lincoln grabbed some ginger ale, hoping it eased the growing head cramps. Maybe I should try something to take my mind off of it for a while. He popped the cap and took a sip. "Although I don't really like playing any video games right now," he frowned, "or reading the comics." He walked out of the kitchen. "I haven't even started on the ones Lynn gave me yesterday." On the subject of those days' savvy comics, Lincoln decided to recall the little episodes that played out in his dreams. Reaching for his bag, he fished out one of the folders that just pulled out a couple sheets of paper. Back at Clyde's house, he had drawn a couple of panels of himself getting an outfit in disguise, but hadn't worked on any further from it. Looking them over, Lincoln wondered if he could make a short issue compressed by these sketches. Remembering Ronnie Ann's compliments during class, the lad hummed, "I guess I could try with my hand at it again." He started going upstairs. Better than sitting and doing nothing, I guess. Well, he did have a bit of homework to do, like any other young kid, though. No one likes doing homework on a Monday. Once he got to his room, the lad wiggled his bag off his shoulders before catching it in hand and tossing it to his chair, sat the paper on the empty space. Falling into his comic, the lad massaged his temples while studying the pictures that lie before him. So my ace-savvy persona disguised himself, made his way back to the hideout. I don't remember if Lisa's persona gave him those instant health shots. He then stuck his tongue out as he looked at the ceiling, shaking his head. Nah, she only had enough of any of us in the hospital. Digging into his bag, he pulled out some blank papers and a pencil. Now that I think about it, what would the rest have been doing? I think Ronnie Ann faked having her leg and hand messed up so she could sneak away. He frowned, but not without letting her mom know first. Tapping the pencil on his head. Lori would have recovered from her wounds easily since hers were straightforward. Lenny would have woken up from her coma, probably have trouble remembering what happened. And Lynn, Lincoln hummed, as the pencil went limp in his hands. Honestly, writing Lynn's state would be awkward from now on. Beating his persona to near death was one thing. Even preparing to finish the job, Ace didn't expect Strongsuit to finally listen to reason, much less saving him at the cost of nearly ending her own life. In fact, Lincoln never went into depth about her condition, other than generic ICU coma plot that typically happens when a writer wants to not deal with a character for a while. Then again, he wouldn't be for certain of what she would have looked like after having a roof collapsed on her. His body shook as a chill went through his nerves. Some things were best left undiscovered. Especially his more gruesome nightmares came to mind. Would she even remember what happened? She shielded my other persona from the falling roof, and I think that would have nearly killed her on top of the burns she got. The pencil tapped the paper, making a small mark before the point before Lincoln's hand started to move in a set of motions. And when I told Lynn about that at therapy, she cried. He frowned at that. So I figured Strongsuit would feel the same way. But that still doesn't solve the question of what caused the girls to act like that in the first place. He paused in his drawing. And for what matter, why did I try my luck with Lynn at all? He told himself before he viewed her strength and deterrent for his other siblings, and tactically went on about trying to get her on his side. But the argument didn't hold much weight, as he would have fought at this point. Maybe I really want to be close to her again, Lincoln summarized, his hand absent-mindedly using the pencil to sketch on paper. She said we had a really great relationship when we were younger, and she was the only sister besides Lily that visited me on her own. Maybe, though, now I think it's just a coincidence. The 11-year-old let his hand rest as his propped-up free hand. Maybe all those times she talked to me alone made me start to warm up to Lynn, he frowned. But I don't know if that will work for the others. As he kept drawing, his imagination kicked into high gear with the full pictures, beginning to paint a new scene. Lincoln imagined how Lily and his other friends, who got lighter injuries, would react to him being awake and fully fit. He smiled a little, seeing Lily bursting into tears and squeezing the life out of him as if he were to disappear upon letting go. After explaining how Lisa would have helped him, the others would feel unsure of whatever they could trust her. Lily even suggested Lincoln use an X-ray on himself in case the little brat decided to put another tracker on him. The ace persona kept him for the mind, but wondered what the others have been since he was incapacitated. Lily had been talked out of enacting revenge on the sisters that weren't hospitalized more than once. In fact, she was about to sneak out, so when Lincoln showed up at the entrance, her resentment grew for every day Lincoln had been gone, and the only thing he could do was to hold his sister as she broke down as soon as she saw him. The group keeping themselves hidden wasn't a surprise, but for a reason it irked him. With Ace being fugitive, Jack and Deuce considered likely suspects, his three red-headed friends, hens hidden themselves, were still unknown to the grand scheme of it all. Surprisingly, the demolition of the lumber factory was blamed on Wildcard Willie due to the salvageable footage showing him and three of his goons to the scene, not to mention the bodies of said goons found in the rubble. Still, Ace knew that the cops would be searching for him for given his disappearance, but if Lisa said true about the Full House being brainwashed. Lincoln then shook his head. No, the girls certainly knew what they were doing. Lynn was quite clear on that, but it was definitely some form of manipulation, or suggestion that goaded into them using extreme measures. Either way, it was definitely something he had to look into. But what the villain from Ace's Rogue Gallery could have done that sort of a capacity? He could have already rooted out Willie and Card Shark, since they both had the Full House with grim results. It couldn't be Old Maid either, since this was, well, not just her style. But she preferred doing petty thefts or getting revenge on those who incited her at some point. Lincoln then glanced over at the stack of comics that Lynn had given him the day before. One of the newest issues was a picture of Jack and Ace, and his new villain who apparently was some black cat. Seriously, an actual cat, not like someone dressed up as one. Squinted his eyes as his tongue poked out of his mouth. A cat might do stuff like a cat would, although I haven't thought about the gang robbing pet stores for cat food or... He shrugged. Yarn balls, maybe? Glancing up. Does Cliff even look like those? I know he still has that old mouse chew toy, but he hasn't bothered with it much. His pencil tapped the paper and sat in silence. I'll just leave it alone for now. Until I know about this kitty. He started drawing a few more lines, but that was left another villain who would definitely use those mind tracks. The sudden sound made Lincoln flinch, causing him to apply a little too much pressure to the point of the pencil until it broke. The boy tilted the pencil up until he got a good look at the now dull lead. Dang it, he muttered. He thought a little frustrated through his thoughts being interrupted, but quickly glanced at his clock that caught him off guard. It's after 5 already? Lincoln muttered to himself. He took a glance at his work before getting out of the chair. Guess time flies when you're zoned in. Might have been one of his parents, seeing his sisters rarely knock or ever break the door off its hinges to invade its privacy. That's why when he opened the door, he faltered a bit upon becoming face to face with Lynn. Hey, Lincoln said in an uneasy tone. Hey, Lynn shifted her weight a little. Just wanted to see if you were in your room. Well, I am, Lincoln replied curtly. When did you guys get here? About an hour ago, Lynn shrugged. Dad's making dinner, so it'll be done like half an hour, I guess. Okay, the loud boy answered. Not having much to say, both kids stood in silence, with the only faint activity going upstairs filling the void. Lynn bit her cheek. Well, I guess I'll see you at dinner if you want to eat. She started to turn. Wait! Lincoln started and Lynn halted. Is Lenny doing anything right now? Not that I know of. The athlete pointed the phone behind her. She's in her room. Lincoln nodded. Great. He then started closing his door. Thanks, he uttered politely before shutting it completely. He waited until he heard Lynn moving away from the door before focusing on his desk. A few more steps forward allowed him to get a clear picture of what he accomplished before Lynn interrupted. Roughly a few pages worth of his imagination, up to the point where Ace was mulling over the culprit response. He had an idea who it could have been, but Lincoln immediately jumped back to his work. Looking back at the door, he wondered that if it would be a good time to put his plan to motion. I could wait till after dinner. He then looked back at his drawing, a frown drawing on his face, but then she might be too busy getting ready for bed, and knowing Lenny, she takes as long as getting ready for that she does for school in the morning. The loud tap his foot. Lori might be around, which would be a big problem because I want to talk to Lenny without anyone else around. Yes, she knew there was a chance the others would eavesdrop on their conversation, and with the thin walls and all. But the point being is to only talk to 2 in the room, and Lincoln wasn't comfortable with having his chat in his room. A sigh left him. Guess now is a better time than any. Turning back to the barrier separates from his room into the hallway, Lincoln pulled the door back just enough to get a subtle peek. It was bare, save for Walt sitting on a small table that had a vase on it. The canary appeared to be busy arranging the feathers on his left wing. He paused his task when he heard Lincoln open his door, staring at the white-haired child for a second before going to his labor. Eyeing each bedroom window door individually, Lincoln stepped out of his comfort zone and closed the door behind him. Taking a breath, he shuffled his feet across the floor until he was front of the room belonging to his older sisters, attempting to ignore the sounds of the occupants in the other rooms. Okay, here goes, he muttered, raising the hesitant fist. He slightly rapped his knuckles on the wood, hoping his sister needed to speak with an answer and not the oldest. He always got an attitude when he was wanting to come into their room. The universe seemed to be in an arrangement with the boy as innocent. A curious face as the fashionist appeared after the door was pulled back. Lenny blinked in surprise. Lincoln? She then heard that Lincoln was planning to chat with her. She imagined it would be days before it became a reality. Hi, Lincoln started, doing his best to avoid stuttering. Are you busy with anything? Well, I was stuck on some math homework. Precocious says toast is a pain. Like, I get the linear inequalities, but trying to find the domain range is totes hard, the blonde muttered, scratching an itch that was starting to form on her head, just thinking about these problems. One quick glance at Lincoln made her drop her musings as not to appear as if she were dismissing him. But it can wait. Need help with something? Lincoln blinked in surprise. Firstly, Lenny, any sort of math above 3rd grade or 2nd grade level, was just about the same as adding oil into water. The two never mixed well together. Heck, trying to pronounce trigonometry would be equivalent to opening a pickle jar for her. Not that it solved the math problems at a high level, but seeing Lenny being able to articulate it in a way that was meant that she understood it was unnerving. And this is my sister who tried to free the cooked chickens at the store? Did Lisa have anything to do with this, or Lincoln? The boy blinked, focusing back to his sister. You okay? She asked with great concern. Her head be tilted to the side slightly in confusion. So sorry, Lincoln started to twist in front of his shirt to try and steer himself. Can we talk for a minute? Sure, totes, Lenny cheered. Probably a little too much for his taste. She backed up so he could step in. Like before, the room felt a little spacious, without the constant clothes and dresses lying about when Lenny did her usual hobby. On the desk, he spotted a thick math book, with a few sheets of paper and a pencil sitting on it. Fortunately, Lori wasn't in the room, nor was her phone or a charger for that matter. So, Lenny dragged out as she closed the door, leaving only a small crack open. What's up? Well, Lincoln started as Lenny moved to her bed. She sat down and patted the spot next to her. He began to feel a little uncomfortable about the uncertainty of being, next to her. She might have a sweet smile, but all for what Lincoln knew, it could have been a facade to get him to his lower guard. Sadly, the boy's legs started to betray him, with low his tense muscles were, sending a minor pain singles up his spine so he could give him a break. Gingerly, Lincoln took the seat, although kept himself just out of arm's reach. But first off, are you okay? Lincoln began. Lenny raised a brow. What do you mean? I don't want to sound mean, but just... Lincoln paused to collect his thoughts. Did Lisa do anything weird to help you become... He wanted to pick at the next word carefully, as to not insult her lack of intelligence. Smarter? Lenny went eye-wide as her mouth fell open. She didn't know whether to feel hurt, offended, or think the question was an insult. Calm down, girl. He doesn't know yet. He doesn't know yet, she told herself, repeatedly meditating the irritation behind her ears as they slowly became wetter. As if it was Janine, Lincoln was asking things still stung. Thinking he may have struck a nerve, Lincoln first spoke. I'm sorry, he pleaded. I didn't mean it like that. It's okay, Lenny started, averting her case. Truth is, Lincoln, I've always been about as smart as Lori. She paused. Well, Not as smart as Lori, but I'm not that stupid. See, I have this disability that makes me have gaps in judgment and makes it hard to focus. Lincoln remained silent, and he felt that Lenny had more to say. So Mom and Dad already have me take these pills to fix it, but I just forget to take it sometimes. So, Lincoln started to having absorbed this new information. That's why you've had a hard time learning how to drive? But how do you know to pick locks and design clothes? It meant for a statement, but the confusion of his tone made it sound more like a question. It depends on the subject, Lenny clarified. Like, no matter what state I'm in, I'll totally get what you're saying from the fashion perspective. But outside of that, she trailed off as her cheeks became a little redder out of embarrassment. The worst part is, I remember how dumb I was once being back on my meds. Beads of sweat began to form on Lincoln's forehead, while his chest weight was like pressing on it. All those times, himself and his siblings feared Lenny being in charge of anything, berating for her acting like a 4-year-old, only to find out that it wasn't because of the really dense, but due to the disorder she couldn't fully control. He had a feeling she might have had something like that at one point. Same went for Lisa, because no 4-year-old ought to have concrete knowledge of handling nuclear fusion. But the middle child never really took the time to solve that mystery. It seemed like no one else ever did what Lenny was implying. And there was that time I had to cover for you and everyone else. Lincoln fought out loud. His stomach squirmed as he considered that Lenny had a tunnel vision at the time due to her limited thought process. And revealing that she was covered for everyone else at the last moment was actually the last reminder on her end. I didn't mean to drop on you on that, Lincoln, Lenny stated, clasping her hands together. I don't have really excuse for how it went down, but I should have tried harder to remember that my hands were full. Lincoln sighed. You weren't on your medication at the time, so I don't blame you, at least, any more than I already did. He added as he gripped his sleeves. I feel like a big jerk for ignoring you for as long as I did. That's why I said you didn't know and may not have known, Lincoln interrupted. But did anyone else? He looked directly at her eyes. Did any of our family knew about this and just use you while you were still in dunce mode? Or does anyone outside of your family? Seeing the fearful look on his eye, Lenny felt that as if her heart had skipped a beat. Yet, it was still feeling warmer than usual. While he didn't say it, the fashionist understood how her little brother was reacting. In spite of being distant, the fact that he still feared for her well-being revealed there was a side of him that he still cared for her as a sister. Mom and Dad knew for a long time. Lenny sat up straight. They even tried putting my medication in food when I forget, but I still notice whenever something tastes funny. Lincoln seemed to relax, but his posture remained tense. But for everyone else, she shook her head. Not even Lori knew about it until after all of us had therapy. She started to sulk, but I'd be lying if I said that I feel used because I couldn't think straight at the time. Lenny squinted her eyes as she took a moment to reflect. Well, straighter. The fashionist thought about how her former friends treat her. Generally, Becky and Mandy weren't bad company. They known each other since elementary school, and although she couldn't remember what grade, heck, they were even willing up to Lenny's airheadedness for the past long point where anyone else would have ignored her. But even they thought I was a dummy in the head and could make a lame excuse not to be around me. Lenny breathed through her nose, though it was produced by a subtle noise as the sinuses became agitated. I can't even remember if they even made that more than once before all this. The older girl glanced at her brother, who seemed to be mulling in his own thoughts, given how the brows were lowly tightening together. It must have been a negative enough to make him irate. The last thing Lenny wanted to do was for Lincoln to be angry at her for anything, and was about to opt in on remaining silent until he spoke. But after what she discovered today, she needed to know if her brother felt the same. Lincoln, Lenny began, grabbing his attention. Do you think I'm crazy? He hesitated. What makes you think that? My friends stopped hanging out with me after I told them what... The blonde choked back a couple tears. What I did to you months ago. They told me we couldn't be friends anymore because of that. But one of them thought I was only pretending to be dumb and sweet, like those scary people in movies. Lincoln hummed for a moment. Like you mean psychos? Lenny nodded, looking towards the floor. Becky and Mandy said they weren't ready to be friends with me again. Her frown deepened, and I don't think they ever will. They probably think I have enough issues belong in that nut house. They are wrong. Lenny raised a brow, raising a side glance to her younger loud. Lenny, you might be dumb at times, but you always keep your heart on your sleeve, Lincoln stated with certainty, and I thought that was going to change anytime soon. The blonde let out a dry huff as she looked away. They said that before they left me alone. That's because they don't know the real you, Lincoln added. Remember what just happened after we got busted on chore day? Yeah, the fashionist shifted back a little on the spot. You pretended that I didn't exist for a whole week. Lenny nodded. Yeah, his voice held an edge of guilt. If Lenny assumed correctly, but I also didn't have a talk with Clyde at all at the moment at the same time, twiddling his thumbs. Me and Clyde have been friends since kindergarten, but I felt that I wanted to help to stop speaking to him completely. After the whole class saw me dressed up as Lily, I didn't think he'd do something crazy in a way, but I guess that's kind of how you've fallen out with your friends? Lenny pierced her lips and thought. Probably, she shrugged. But as a week went on, I started to calm down and figured it was just a bad call on Clyde's part, because he really thought our class was into arg. Lincoln then gave an uncomfortable glance to the side, and she was slipping a serious, sad streak after a few days. But the point is, he raised a finger. I knew Clyde was enough that I could hold his mistake against him, putting him down. But so they needed me to adjust, and they looked the past of what happened. His shoulders fell. At least I hope so. I don't think I'm good at giving advice these days. Lenny let the words sink in. Becky did say they may forgive her if Lincoln did first, or they eventually realized what Lenny did was a mistake that affected her greatly, since Lincoln, at least, so he was closer on the nose than believed. He looking down towards him. Lenny began to wonder if Lincoln would take his own words to heart, if it still felt ways off that his sisters would be at least forgiven as a whole. But by now he should, and it seemed to. Now all of this was just a mistake that uncomfortably had a serious repercussions. Actually, Lenny started in a daring move, shifted her closer, wrapped her arm around his shoulder. Lincoln flinched for the contact, but made no attempts to squirm out of it. It might come out true. Isn't that the reason you forgave me after chore day? Technically, you apologized first. Lincoln chuckled a little. But yeah. But what about now? I mean, I'm not asking for it now because I want it. Lenny paused to gather her thoughts. I want to be the older sister you can count on me again, Lincoln. She removed her hand. But I doubt you want to be around someone who you might think might be pulling a nice face as a trick. I never said you were crazy, Lenny, Lincoln clarified, placing his hands on his lap while shifting his body slightly so he could face her better. I've heard enough from Lynn to know that whatever everyone was, his fingers curled inward, an accident, if it could be called that. But I also figured that nice people can be mean sometimes. I'm not gonna lie, when I say I was horrified when everyone, including my sisters, normally on good sides, would beat me up, the boy's nose flared a little. It's just very complicated. How so? Lenny asked in concerned tone. As much as I want things to go back the way they were, it just feels impossible. Lincoln folded his arms. Like I feel that I could learn to trust Lynn a little more, even though she broke one of my arms, and even you, he gestured to the blonde. Since you're always so nice, it's really hard to stay mad at you, but if I were to talk to Lori or maybe Luann, he bit his cheek. I felt like it might explode on them in a bad way just because of me going to the hospital. But I can't really help but think of those past moments where they used me for something, and I end up getting the short stick because of it. He pulled up an arm to the rest of his chin on his palm. I nearly blew up Lynn from the same reasons, and although for it, she would pummel me again. But she didn't, Lenny pointed out. She didn't, Lincoln repeated, which surprised me because at the time I couldn't remember the last time she acted like... He trailed off, wasted thinking the proper comparison. Lenny raised a brow. Like what? Like you, the boy answered. Lynn started acting like something like an older brother since she got into sports. So it felt like really odd that she was trying to be the comfort person. I appreciate her helping figuring out a plan to approach you guys, but I still don't like I really know my sisters as I thought I did. Lenny nodded. Well, didn't we know each other good enough either? Lincoln dipped his head slightly. Lynn said you guys didn't know me that much either. I met the other girls, Lincoln. The boy raised a brow at Lenny's words. See, we end up fighting a lot because... She scratched her head. How did Miss Lopez say it? Shaking her head. Anyway, we end up fighting due to not taking the moment to walk into another person's shoes, if that makes sense. Putting a finger on her cheek. Though, I can't imagine wearing Lynn's cleats or Lana's shoes. They're totes gross. Lincoln eyed her questioningly. Lenny? Realizing she was going off base. Right, my bad. Basically, all of us have issues and we probably didn't have to brought up if it weren't for therapy. Lincoln hummed in understanding, though it brought up more questions as far as the mental stability of his family in general. I'll figure that out later, he decided. During the times you remember being used when you weren't thinking straight, how did you feel about that? Lenny tapped her lap with her finger, her gaze shifting around as she formulated the answer. Lincoln began to wonder if he may have asked the wrong question, given how he had forced completely certain situations, because if he wasn't strong enough to defend himself, the middle child felt as if Lenny was the person to help him carve a path with dealing with future outbursts. Seeing the situation wasn't so different. Sometimes, Lenny began, a small fire was lit behind her eyes upon seeing the little peeved. Sometimes I wish I could have said something to change the argument, or at least stop going along with whatever the solution is. I think that's how many of the fights I had with Lori. She then glanced at the floor. Maybe with the rest of her family, but it feels like it would have been too late anyhow. This brought to another question. When you were mad at Lori's suggestion on how you guys should have split the dresses, because all the days of the week end with a Y, I know, Lenny spoke a little haughtily. But she didn't suggest it, Lincoln. That was me. She then sighed heavily. It might have been better just to drop the dress together. If I had been on my pills at the time, I would have pointed out that I already had the dress before Lori came home. I was even wearing it by the time she came home through the door, so she couldn't tell me to take it back. She raised her arms, temporarily putting her emphasis on that statement. Lincoln's mouth went agape as the new information reasoned in his head. Wait, he replied, stopping Lenny before she continued any further. So from what I remember, or was told at least, you both had the same dress around the same time, right? Lenny tilted her head. Well, yeah, but not really. Feeling that he needed to clarify, Lincoln asked, were you two at the mall at the same time? Lenny shook her head. I took the bus to stop my shopping earlier that day, and Lori wasn't ready to go when I wanted to, she replied, continuing to search her memories of that Saturday. I don't think I ran into her in that mall day either. Lincoln then had his eyes narrowed as his hands clasped together in his mouth. So if you both took the bus, then Lori drove to the mall later that day, and if you had to buy it that time Lori got back, his eyes widened a bit before pointing at the blonde, then you had the dress at least an hour before Lori got home, and if she asked you to take your dress back, his finger went limp for a second, only to join the rest as they tensed into a fist. One of his eyes twitched as his expression morphed into surprise and anger. Lenny was already feeling unsettled by this transformation. She scooted away a few inches as steam started to come out of Lincoln's ears like a teapot. Then this is just like the time I taught you how to drive, but worse! Lenny was inclined to agree, but she couldn't say anything lied at Lori's feet. Lincoln, I know you're mad, but it's not all her... Lenny? He whipped his head towards her, locked in rage as his eyes began to calm her up. How would you feel if your work all you did suddenly went to waste because somebody didn't like the idea of having another driver in the house? Lenny made a nervous humming noise. I'd be mad about that. And when she told about it after I failed, Lori apologized for it, the fashionist pointed out. She even taught me how to drive not long after. She rubbed her arm. Even though we ended up in a neighborhood's pool, Dad was super totes not happy about that. But that doesn't change the fact that she made you fail on purpose. You're lucky the same driving instructor wouldn't let you take the test again. Lenny sulked at the reminder. She might have been able to do a retest, but after failing 13 times, the family was getting charged extra fees for the damages throughout the driving car test. And the driver instructor, if it weren't for the Michigan law, then Lenny was allowed to reset as many times as needed, if she was certain to be barred from stepping within 100 foot of DMV. I swear, Lori's ego has to be bigger than Lynn's and Lola's combined, Lincoln muttered, tapping his foot against the bad leg with the rapid manner. No longer feeling comfortable sitting down, he jumped off the bed and started to walk around. And it's obvious she didn't learn anything from that. But then why would I be surprised? It's not the first time she only cared about herself and her dumb social status. Why else would she puke on me? Then instead of apologizing, takes a picture and sends it to Bobby? Or the one time she drives us all to school instead of crying about her boyfriend not wearing a stupid dress. And for that matter, I can't even spend a couple days without one person I see as an older brother before she starts getting jealous. Lenny was perplexed at how her brother was acting, but if she wasn't certain if she could do anything to calm him down. As he paced around his circles, berating his older sister, the fashionist wondered if it would have been better to keep that information to herself. Much like how Lincoln inadvertently revealed the insults the girls said behind each other's backs, she may have very well been nearly impossible for her roommate to reconcile with her brother. If the sister fight protocol thingy wasn't out of style, we might need it to keep Lincoln and Lori away from each other. The 16-year-old thought bitterly. Lincoln? 'Cause heaven forbid we both be our actual selves. Lincoln spat in the imitation of Lori, and not even that, registering Lenny's call. I guess it must be so hard to stand still for 10 seconds, and I didn't blow it. The timer was set longer than I thought. His hands flew in the air. How is that even a crime? Lenny then pierced her lips together. Lincoln, at least I know why I end up having to come over with these ideas whenever we're together. We can't even depend on our oldest sister to be a real leader. Normally Lenny had a lot of patience in a family like this, but this one if he needed to work things out. Outside viewer might say otherwise, given the constant spats here and there in this case though. It was because she was quite obvious to the main source of contamination until smacked in the face. But ever since she started taking her medication at the required intervals, Lenny was quicker at noticing the problems, preferred taking them longer, then it became a bigger issue.